Joining us now from Nairobi is Professor Ambassador Maria Nzomo. She served as Kenya's ambassador to Zimbabwe and is currently the director of the Institute of Diplomacy and International Studies at the University of Nairobi. Ambassador Nzomo, thanks for joining us. Let me start first by asking you about Boko Haram. The African Union Summit has decided that it will sanction the formation of a force of 7,500 to combat this militant group. Is that going to be enough?
It will not be enough. It will not be enough, not just because of the numbers, but because also I do not believe that is an adequate strategy for combating international terrorism. Now, in the first instance, it has taken Africa too long to respond on its own without expecting external assistance to the growing terrorism on the continent. Terrorism is not a new thing to this continent. It has occurred in East Africa. It started way back in the 70s, but mostly recently in the 90s and, of course, now. Now, always the response has been militaristic, either taking in troops or, creating, strengthening the military. Often forgotten is the real causes that underlie international terrorism. That, behind Boko Haram, there is a larger problem. And I would want to see if this has to be much more meaningful, apart from actually having more troops to counter terrorism. We begin to look at the socioeconomic and other conditions that create terrorists among African people. It's no longer, as we used to think before, a Western imported problem brought into Africa. It is really also an African problem. Al-Shabaab has germinated from Africa, so is Boko Haram.
So when you say you would like to see outside help to combat Boko Haram, what kind of outside help are you talking about?
I am saying that we should not be relying so heavily on outside assistance. In the past, that's what has happened. This is the first time we are seeing an African force being taken to counter a terrorist attack. We didn't see a similar intervention when it happened in East Africa. But I'm saying that in addition to Africa taking over the responsibility of actually militarily intervening to counter terrorism, we also need to use other approaches, because it has to be a comprehensive strategy that reflects the United Nations 2006 counterterrorism global strategy.
This year's summit of the African Union was the year of women's empowerment and development in Africa. How is the AU going to go about achieving gender equality?
Achieving gender equality, first of all, is also not an African problem. It's a global problem. But on the continent of Africa, where now it has become, of course, a major concern at the level of policy, as you saw that the African Union made it the major theme and focus of this 24th summit, we need to have much more committed approaches to combating inequalities, gender inequalities on a continent. Declarations will not do. Policy frameworks will not do. They are good, and they are good platforms from which to lobby. But we African and other leaders across the world, they have become more serious, going beyond signing declarations, resolutions, conventions, and then just being a piece of paper that doesn't, actually reflect outcomes in terms of actually combating what creates the underlying problems that underlie gender inequalities, the socioeconomic and cultural barriers, for example, in Africa, that keep a lot of women from having capacity to get equality with men. We have to move away from that, from political rhetoric, to beginning to actually very meaningfully and very decisively allocating resources to address the socioeconomic and other areas of barriers that create inequalities between men and women. We have to begin to address the problems that make women, despite even creating opportunities for education, not to be able to meaningfully benefit from the fruits of education due, for example, to the problem of lack of retention of girls in school. Those barriers need to be addressed.
So what are the practical steps that you would like to see implemented to achieve this goal?
A practical way is actually to begin to walk the talk. We have enough policies, legal frameworks in place. We need to start seeing more allocation of resources directly targeted towards addressing inequalities, focusing at empowering women, especially the most disadvantaged, rural women, another vulnerable categories of women. And beginning also to realize that this problem cannot be resolved by actually heads of states or policymakers not actually involving women in decision making. There has to be a concerted effort to bring more women, not a few women, but a lot more women in very senior and top decision making capacities to influence direction of change and policy, to be at the table, the decision making tables, where key decisions are made about where resources should be allocated, what kind of interventions need to be made about and for women. Those are the kind of strategies I'm thinking about.
The African Union has a new chairman, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe. How committed is he, in your view, to gender equality? He has made some controversial statements about gender equality. In one of his speeches, he said that there are things that men can do that women can't do. We have to face that.
Let me put it this way. Robert Mugabe is a controversial leader, even in Africa. And I know by Western standard, he is not the most liked person. But I would not say that he probably, is, the worst example in terms of, issues of achieving rights. There are others who are equally guilty as charged. I think the problem with President Mugabe is that he has, acquired a reputation of being very combative, and especially on matters related to his relations of his government with the Western countries. And I think it has to be realized that his being the African Union chair puts him only in a ceremonial capacity. When you are chair of the African Union, it is really a ceremonial capacity where the role you play mainly is to chair meetings of the African Union and perhaps also to attend some of the key international meetings with other global institutions and actors. For example, meetings of the G8 and G20, where I suspect you may be having some problems, being allowed to participate. But that's something we have to wait and see. The point, though, is that whether we have Mugabe as a chair or not, that may not necessarily be the answer to what we need in terms of resolving the problems that exist, includes the problem of equality.
Ambassador Maria Nzomo, thanks for joining us.